passage about toys and their function, how the role function, how toys have been perceived has changed. Okay, we quickly read the passage and summarize it before we look at the questions. Although the explicit didacticism of modern toys is relatively novel in human history, playthings have always seemed to provide a toehold on the climb towards maturity. Okay, so didactic means intending to teach. So the explicit didacticism of modern times is a new event in human history. Every toy seems to be like educational toy, instructional toy. There's some sort of learning that a child is having through toys. This didacticism is a novel, is a new thing in human history. Playthings have always provided a toehold to the world of maturity. Somewhere they've helped your development. A ram-shaped pull toy from the 3rd millennium BC city of Tel Asmeh likely encouraged a Mesopotamian child to practice crawling on the floor and then toddling down the rain. In the Kalahari desert, the child-sized bow and arrow still helps to prepare the San child for his eventual role in the hunt. So it's always had some sort of connection with, the mature world or what you're going to do later. But this explicit teaching part of it may be new. Following the spread of capitalism and the Protestant ethic beginning in the 16th century, play in much of the Western world was frowned upon unless it was construed as a form of physically, mentally, and morally productive work. Now, this change happened in the 16th century in the Western world. When you talked of play, it was frowned upon. It was uh, not something that was regarded very favorably unless that play had a physically, mentally, and morally productive effect. It had some sort of physical, mental, and moral result at the end. It had some aim that would be physically, mentally, and morally productive. Play was not, was frowned upon. It was not looked down upon. Educational toys like the ones that filled my son's playroom emerged more or less directly from that kind of moralizing and industrious zeal. So she's now toys that are there in a child's room are from that philosophy that a toy or play should be morally, mentally, physically, mentally, and morally productive. In the mid 20th century, that zeal gained a dubious neuroscientific rationale. That industrious zeal that everything that has to have a purpose, a child should learn, that had a dubious neuroscientific rationale. So they added a neuroscientific angle to it, and the author calls it dubious because he or she doesn't believe in it. Beginning in the 1960s, researchers studying lab rats, cats, and rhesus macaques found that mammals needed relevant stimulation early in their lives in order to develop crucial faculties such as sight. They also, so you should give them the right kind of stimulation to develop their faculties, and these faculties included sight also. They also discovered that young creatures had a superabundance of synaptic connections that were dramatically pruned back as they developed. So they also had a lot of synaptic connections, something that happens in the nerves, uh, that were became less as they developed. Animals reared in environments where they could interact with toys and other members of their species had more synapses than those raised in isolation. On their own terms, these were groundbreaking insights into what is now known as neuroplasticity. And what is neuroplasticity? The study of how the brain changes over time. But the results were quickly lumped together when they did that experiment on cats and dogs and rhesus monkeys, and not monkeys, macaques, and all that. What did they develop? They looked at these results, found that when these animals grew up in isolation, they were not that good. When they grew up with toys and playthings, they develop better faculties. All these results, they bunched them together, lumped them together, and extrapolated them to human beings in scientifically unfounded ways. They assumed that this will work in human beings also. And they did it without using scientific, proper, established methods. Over the next 30 years, the beliefs took root that we have to stimulate young children's brains through toys, bilingualism, and snatches of intrauterine back in order Bach music in order to ensure those brains are forming and maintaining the maximum number of synapses so that children can reach their fullest potential and avoid lifelong drudgery, misery, even criminality. Therefore, from then the theory has been give them as much stimulus as possible, keep those synapses in the brain active so that they live to their full potential. In the late 1990s, the neuroscience writer and research funder dubbed this the myth of the first 3 years, right? There was a myth that a child learns the maximum the first 2 or 3 years, therefore give him as much input. He called it the myth of the first 3 years. That is the passage. Toys, role of toys, an experiment on the neurological impact, then which was extrapolated to human beings without much basis. And later they said that they quoted somebody saying that this is the myth. So there's not probably what has been stated by them is not necessarily true about giving a child educational toys and motivating them so that they reach their potential. They also discovered that young creatures had a super abundance of synaptic connections that would dramatically prune back as they developed. Animals reared in environments where they could interact with toys and other members of their species had more synapses than those raised in isolation. A researcher wants to investigate the impact of playing with toys on the quantity of synapses. Which of the following would be least relevant for them? A. The number of synapses in animals raised in isolation. Would this be relevant? If the animals were raised in isolation with toys and animals raised in company with toys, what was the number of synapses? That will make us a difference. If it was raised in isolation without toys, also will show if the synapses go down, then you can see the impact of toys. So A will be relevant. The number of synapses in animals raised in environments of interaction with toys and members of the species would be relevant. Number of synapses in animals raised in environment of interaction with other members but no toys. This will not be relevant because the synapses could be because of other members and not toys. So toys are not there, then how will you know the impact of toys? Now, the difference between option A and C is A is an isolation. So we don't, the option doesn't tell us whether toys are there or not. Either case, the number of synapses, toys impact on synapses can be figured out. One, they are in isolation and no toys, synapses are less. They are in isolation with toys, then the impact of isolation on these kids are known. So the toy element, impact of toys on synapses will be known. Okay, when they are in isolation, the number of synapses are less. Okay, so they are in isolation, number of synapses are less. This could be the impact of isolation or of toys. Now, if they are with toys, that would obviously make it better for us to know. Isolation but toys, also synapses go down or go up, then you can also see the impact of toys. Impact of isolation on number of synapses, impact of toys and isolation on synapses, both can be seen. But in C, toys don't have any role at all because specifically told us no toys. All right. Therefore, the correct answer is C. Which of the following would best sum up the author's viewpoints on the findings of para 2? Now here, para 2 is the paragraph. When it's in slides, there is a little difference in the paragraphization, but this is the paragraph which is the the conclusions of the findings of animals who grew up with toys and grew up in isolation. So still here, till isolation, Animals raised in environments where they could interact with toys and other members had more synapses than those raised in isolation. So this is one paragraph. The next paragraph says, on their own terms, these were groundbreaking insight, what is known as neuroplasticity, the study of how the brain changes over time. But the results were quickly lumped together and extrapolated to humans in scientifically unfound ways. Over the next 30 years, the belief took root that we have to stimulate children's brains through toys, bilingualism, or BARC to ensure that the brains form and maintain the maximum number of synapses so that the child can reach the fullest potential and avoid a life of drudgery. All right, that is the paragraph he's talking about.